listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way. This week we're back for another episode of our 64 RPG Elimination. It's a bracket fight, so get on your gloves, put up your paws, and let's do it.
Welcome to the party, sports fans. It's part 3 of the bracket to determine the greatest RPG of all time. I'm Eoin.
I'm Conrad.
I'm still Savage.
And I am the arbiter and knower of all bracket knowledge, Scar, Barbarian King, and not a robot.
Let's get ready to rumble! Alright.
Oh man, we're blowing out speakers. We're taking down titans. We're checking names off a list. Here we go. It's been a while since we recorded one of these, but we are wading through the gladiatorial pits on this one, aren't we?
I can't feel my ears.
I think so. But there's been a lot of response to this one. I mean, this one gets people going. You know?
Yeah, well, you start stabbing people's favourites, they tend to notice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, to be fair, Owen, you called my baby ugly. Savage, our friendship is a lie. And
we've known that for
I hope you burn in hell.
So this bracket fight, we have Conrad, as you can hear, is joining us. Special guest to the show, Conrad. Who you weren't on.
We had to make sure that there was no consistent roster, otherwise we might accidentally start voting the same way each time we do this.
I think it helps to have this wild card, and there's no card wilder than our good friend Conrad Kinch. Conrad, you are of course a host of your own popular podcast, Send 3 and 4pence.
Yes.
I caught up on a bunch of episodes recently. You've been covering some very wide and wild ground.
Yeah, Send 3 and 4pence is a podcast about things that I like to talk about, which includes RPGs, war games, the law, and recently a Napoleonic trolley problem, where I listened to a recent podcast about the Siege of Badajoz, and then just tied myself in knots trying to sort of work out what the right thing to do was, and I'm still not sure. Anyway, regardless.
Okay, well, let's begin round 3 of all this mess. As before, we're going through 8 matchups, 16 of the greatest RPGs according to an arbitrary poll of online gaming. And the first of our matchups this evening will be the we did 4th edition again and did it righter, newcomer 13th Age.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a fantasy roleplay, sort of inspired by the flow of 4th edition, but not necessarily the heavy tactical combat and sluggy nature that so many people complained about.
It's a looser goose.
But who's it taking on, Shane? Who's it taking on?
Yeah, who are we going up against?
It's taking on a tag team of quite significant proportions. The FFG Warhammer 40k stable, Dark Heresy, Deathwatch, Rogue Trader, the Chaos one, and the Imperial Guard one. God damn it! I knew this. Yes.
Black Crusade.
And Black Crusade. Yes. And technically the 2nd edition of Dark Heresy as well.
A plethora of RPGs.
A plethora.
Okay, so 13th Age is a clever, well-designed game that had one really big story innovation, in that there were kind of 13. You have one unique thing about your character, and which has been often co-opted by some other RPG stuff where you have one unique thing about your character. You're the only occultist in the world, or you have 3 eyes. or your nipples can squirt mead. It's something like that. Like you have something unique about yourself. That was one big role playing innovation, and the big combat escalation they had was the escalation dice, where you got to basically every round there was a scaling hit bonus came into play that increased. That basically meant that combat built to a crescendo because later on you were much more accurate.
So no whiffing in the 6th round.
No, not
you're
really.
Going to hit.
Not really.
It's going to get decided. Okay.
However, it's a good RPG with a lot of good ideas in it. However, I remember first getting to play the 40k RPG. It was after a convention, and we were all so excited to actually get to play it. That this is people in their I think it was late 20s, early 30s, and we all went back to a friend of the show's house, sat down, created characters, and then played for 8 hours. Because we were so excited about the thought of playing an official 40k RPG. We're like, oh man, I'm going to roll a guardsman, and I'm going to roll this, I'm going to roll that. And it was great fun. And that spun into an 8-year campaign. And just because of the weight of that, and the narrative weight of a 40k RPG showing up for the first time, like everyone thought, why ask them with a 40k RPG? And then one comes along, and then they keep coming, and we got ones in different genres, different things. The mechanics weren't amazing, but they were a lot of fun to roll around with. So yeah, I'm gonna go to 40k stable on this one.
And it was a lot of new writing, a new setting writing for at that point an IP, a property that had the Horus Heresy was getting explored a great deal, but we hadn't had a lot of new cool places to go that had much flesh on the bones for 40k up until Dark Heresy, and then we get all sorts of new segmentums and solar systems, things like that. 13th Age, I haven't played it, so I can't really speak to it. I remember the excitement Eoin speaks of, though. And that was tempered, I suppose, by the time you got to the 3rd and 4th and 5th RPG being released in these tomes. I have the first 3 on my bookshelf, but I would hazard that I probably haven't cracked the cover of Deathwatch more than a couple of times. So, I don't know.
For me, I don't know. I feel sort of in a similar position to Eoin in this one. Heresy, though that may be. Just, I've said it before in the past that I don't consider the FFG 40k RPGs objectively good, but their particular style of stodgy, 80s era design just seems to fit the 40k universe so well. It's the feeling of, it's not great, but it fits the horrible universe and all the things, all of the flavor of that. It's just like even the rich toffs of the Rogue Trader can only do so much. They're relying on their legions of dudes and their over expensive artifacts to get anywhere. But I will say though that I am really, really interested in 13th Age as a sort of a mechanical take. It's a tough one because I know it's sort of another way to play D&D, but with some extra flavor. Because not only is there that one unique thing mechanic and the escalation die, but there's other touches like the icon system.
Yeah. Where
every character has got some relationship with one of the big NPCs of the setting, and every game session you roll a dice, and in some way your greatest friend or your greatest enemy is going to show up and change up the game for you in some way.
Conrad, any thoughts on either of these?
13th Age is, to my knowledge, which despite I haven't played it, is a perfectly acceptable D20 game. But and I do have a soft spot for Jonathan Tweet because who I believe Jonathan Tweet wrote it, didn't he?
He was one of the
Ooh,
co-writers on it, yeah.
I think so.
Partnered up
And
with a guy
I've
called
a soft spot for him because of Ars Magica. But as for the 13th icons, I mean, I've you know, I have unique. Well, I know Savage. I know a unique friend. It's not that great, so you know that's not a thing. But the 40k RPGs, they're sort of clunky and kludgy, and Scotch on the Rocks cool, and I love them, and I love the setting, and my God, they produced some splat books that were terrible, but the Fantasy Flight Games RPGs, particularly Rogue Trader, they're sort of like a pug. They're ugly and they shouldn't work, but I love them anyway. I think so. Yeah, I think that I love the Emperor. What more is to be said?
Okay, show of hands time. Show of hands time.
I'm getting a very distinctive. This is good, but I like this.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, from a design perspective, 13th Age is probably an absolute. You know, I believe it won awards, but don't you dare call my baby ugly.
Okay, I'm going for 13th Age because it occurs to me that GW had absolutely forever to bring us one good 40k RPG, and having brought us 5, they still couldn't really nail the deal. And I like what I've seen of 13th Age. I love the world building as part of the group sort of putting things together. Like, everyone gets to have a chance to insert a place or a locale or a kingdom. So despite having not played it, but then again I haven't played most of the GW 40k RPGs either, so I'm going to give mine to 13th Age. But you can all shout me down now, and your Emperor is ugly.
you never loved the Emperor, Savage.
Blood for the Blood God. So is that a 3-1?
That's 3-1.
3-1.
Yeah,
puppets.
It's close, but I think
puppets of the Corpse King. Okay, let's crack right on.
Okay, so next up is yet another FFG staple, or the new hotness and the bringer of the generic yet versatile funny dice, Genesis with a Y, versus a venerable 90s RPG of some repute, Earthdawn, aka this is what happened before the Stone Age and before Shadowrun.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Who's got anything to say in defense of
So I've played both extensively. Admittedly, I played Genesis as the Star Wars FFG system, because it's the same system more or less. It takes out one type of build, the crit fishing build, and it keeps everything else in there. It is a marvelous RPG to play at low XP, and it completely breaks in a ridiculously degenerate way. Almost like, you know, a couple of bit of XP in. Now they changed how they handle talent trees a bit to, I think, cut down on that a bit, but I'm pretty sure you can still dive right into ludicrous accuracy, which is all like I'm always very conflicted when I find I can trivially break an RPG a little bit in, and that's nearly every RPG, but whatever. Earthdawn is a really cool setting. Earthdawn is D&D when someone said, right, we are going to construct our world around why you go into dungeons. And the reason why you go into dungeons in D&D or in Earthdawn is there are all these lost caches of civilization in those dungeons who had to hide out from the kind of Cthulhu apocalypse that happens when the horrors showed up. And you've got to go into places and dig out answers. And I went, okay, why are adventurers great? It's because they tie their names to things, and that becomes their power. The stories are told about that becomes their power. So there's a lot of really cool ideas. It's got quite a unique setting in that it's a hodgepodge of different kind of Tolkien-esque and non-Tolkien races mixed together in effectively where ancient Mesopotamia will eventually be. It's a tremendous RPG from an ideas point of view, whereas Genesis is a good generic engine. So I will go with Earthdawn because it's got a lot of ambition.
Savage?
Okay, I'm with
Wait.
Owen here in the sense that I too quite liked how Genesis sort of put its bones together, but ultimately it is just a system. Like, it doesn't have a setting to hang off of it. I mean, it's Genesis is kind of probably going to be my second or third pick for a system to run when I need to reach for something off the shelf. But Earthdawn is this squirrely, crazy, before Shadowrun, kind of prehistory, and it, as Owen says, it has some great ideas wrapped up there, and provides this really deep lore for any chummers and runners out there. I got an early start on Shadowrun in second ed, and I've always been deeply in love with the sheer silliness of cyberpunk and fantasy mashed together.
I prefer the term soiled on a moral level, but okay.
But I really do like Earthdawn a lot. It's trippy, kind of mid-90s fantasy that is bucking against D&D at a time when D&D was pretty much the only fantasy game out there. It was
it was the 90s. D&D was sort of considered a bit of a lame duck at that point.
Yeah, so you had this punky kid to come along and go, at some point this leads to dragons and mirror shades. So yeah, Earthdawn for me.
Fair enough. I kind of got to go the same way. Because like I bought a copy of Genesis and I bought a bunch of those funny dice, and it looks interesting, yeah, but it doesn't. I read through the whole thing, read the book, and they said, here's all of our example settings, here's how you play space, here's how you play fantasy, here's how you play Netrunner, and I was just like, it ran off me like water off a duck's back. Whereas Earthdawn, I don't think I've ever even seen an Earthdawn book, and I'm so curious about Earthdawn. Like, just reading reviews, hearing people talk about it, it's just catchy. It catches inside your head, and it's just going, yeah, I want to see that, even if it is some horrible mismatch of like second and third ed Shadowrun or whatever. It's just something's calling to me there. Something makes me want to go look at that. So yeah, I'm going to vote for Earthdawn. Conrad, we haven't put you in a hard spot at all, have we?
No, not at well. Words cannot express how little of a shit I give about either of these games, as I have played or read neither. But I have looked at the Wikipedia page of both of them, and I shall be going with Earthdawn as it credits its writer, and Genesis because it does not.
Well, that's
It is a
FFG
corporate
all
entity
over,
after
isn't
all.
it? That's
So
FFG all over.
Earthdawn it is.
Earthdawn it's a sweep, isn't it? Is that a sweep?
Yeah, that's a full sweep. Earthdawn is probably one of the most strongest and least controversial votes so far, and poor Genesis takes a bye. Although, wait, isn't it still? Yeah, the Star Wars version.
It's still good.
It's still in.
It's still got representation.
So-
It's still got
Oh, it's okay. I'll vote that down too.
Unfortunately, if we were allowed to undo our mistakes, we would never have done this podcast.
Okay, so that's 2 rounds down. Shane, wait, what's? Whoa! Who's this? Coming over the bleachers. He's throwing chairs. Oh my word! It's Mr.E.
It is. It's called a run-in. Look it up.
Oh, sure. We
Too
couldn't.
late. You're too late. We've already condemned 13th Age and Genesis to the trash pit of history.
Okay.
Welcome to the bracket fight, Mr.E. We've got a few of these under our belt. We thought you weren't in town this weekend. We figured we'd get away with this without you showing up and throwing down. So I guess if
I'm just here for a fight. So 13th
all right,
Age
let's
and
go.
Oh, do you
13th
wanna
Age
fight?
and Genesis down already. Well, I don't care about them because they're clearly losers. They've already been knocked out. So they don't matter anymore. Who
Okay,
are the winners?
Scar, Who have we got? Who have we got?
The winners
We need
so
some fresh
far
meat
have
for this
been,
guy.
Yeah. Okay. The winners so far have been the 40k RPGs and
All of them.
Earth Dawn, the prequel to the next contestant, which is Shadowrun.
Oh, sucker and
No
succotash.
specific edition, because we've already had this episode about how that's a religious conflict, not a rules thing.
Yeah.
I will
And
throw
it is
fists.
up against yet another 90s staple, and one of the second only to the venerable Vecton Zeta as cool 90s gritty mecha games. It's Heavy Gear, the only RPG that's
You did this on purpose. You've done this on purpose.
No.
You're doing.
No, I didn't. This is the cruelty
Oh,
of the
my
dice,
word.
my friend. I want to remind everyone, Heavy Gear has a cartoon. That means it's just as popular as D&D.
Shadowrun's got a terrible 80s short film, though, so that's worth something.
I'm now going to finish
Oh,
this.
the editor's going to have to watch that, isn't he?
I need a minute. Someone else take us away from this.
All right.
Viewers.
Well, Mr.E, would you like to start us off by squaring up these two grizzled 90s veterans?
You son of a gun.
Sure. Well, I will straight up begin by saying I know Shadowrun an awful lot better than Heavy Gear, which is probably going to bias me. But Heavy Gear, it's just it's yet another kind of big mecha walking around game that isn't MechWarrior, right? So.
Oh, I could have a fight. Well, Liam could have a fight with you. I haven't.
Yeah, but it's
I like
I don't
Heavy
have
Gear.
it's an also ran in the giant stompy robot games.
You also ran.
Whereas Shadowrun, at least, I try not to actually. Shadowrun, at least, they were like, well, what's good? What's popular in RPGs? Well, all the cyberpunk stuff is very hot right now, and fantasy is always good, and shooting stuff is great, and corporate dystopias is very cool right now, and then just decided to put it all in one book. I think, given the matchup between the two, I'm going to have to give it to Shadowrun just for the sheer audacity of let's do everything at once, and they actually then managed to make it kind of work. And I know Shadowrun's editions, it's on about 17 editions at this stage, I think, and there's been a lot of ups and downs in it, but the basic premise of melding fantasy and cyberpunk together has worked pretty well right the way through. So
All right.
I go Shadowrun.
Okay.
Oh, I guess
Well, I
we've got
think
to give you the
I need
counter.
to.
Counterpunch, Scar. What you got to say?
This is all going to be very personal opinion, I find. Well, first off, I sort of need to come out in defense of the mecha. Well, I know the mecha side had a pretty big upset in the last episode, but even so, I do feel like I need to defend my corner a little as the things. And while as I said last time, I'm not as big a fan of the stompy robots of MechWarrior as some others are, I know the source material that Heavy Gear is blatantly stealing from, and it's a more dynamic setting of high speed mecha combat where everyone's got rocket powered roller skates and they're just tank tread drifting across the desert, firing off missiles and guns, and it's a lot more my speed for a mecha game than Baltec is. And then there's sort of my natural countercultural, pretentious contrarianism thing. I don't like Shadowrun and the juggernaut of game. Juggernaut's a strong word, but I don't feel like it's unique. Okay, when Shadowrun came out, it was unique. It was cool. It had its own style. It was styling. It was outselling its own source material. It was the nexus of cool and hip and fusion and whatever. It's 2020, and there's Shadowrun video games, there's Edition Wars, there's lunchboxes. I feel overexposed to Shadowrun and all of its things.
Okay. All right.
I do.
Condemning it for being successful? That's a bit harsh.
It
practically has a Will Smith movie.
They both
name.
they both had Xbox games. Oh no, Heavy Gear didn't. I'm thinking of MechWarrior again. Never mind.
You leave mech stuff.
You're talking about Bright. Bright was
Yes,
I watched Bright and I thought, man, this is a great Shadowrun movie. I hope they never make one.
But yes, my vote is for Heavy Gear because I think it's kept its 90s cool while Shadowrun has sold out to the corporates.
My thinking on this one is Shadowrun is the Ghost Rider of RPGs. It is 90% amazing visual and concept, 10% unrealized potential. It's this, like, everyone goes, why is Ghost Rider a great hero? And he's so cool. He's a skeleton with a flaming head who rides a motorcycle and, wraps a flaming chain around sinners and drags them after his bike. I mean, that's so cool. Like, yeah, but what's he about? And they're like, he looks so cool, and he does. There are so many tattoos of Ghost Rider that are nothing to do with how much someone likes the character or read the comic, but just because he looks amazing. And Shadowrun has a bit of that going for it. Shadowrun is this amazing concept of elves and giant guns and magic and tech and hacking and dragons all mixed together. And it never quite get there in a game. But every 5 years, like the pon farr, the urge comes upon me to run Shadowrun or play Shadowrun. And then I start reading books and I give up. Because it's that badly written. All that said, the only thing I know about Heavy Gear is I watched the cartoon with the Vanguard of Justice versus the Shadow Dragons. So Shadowrun wins.
Okay, Conrad. I feel like this is the episode for you not to give it a rat damn.
Well, okay. I have played some Shadowrun. I read some of the novels. I am familiar with Heavy Gear from just reading the odd review, and I've played. As I said, I've played a bit of Shadowrun, and I don't know Heavy Gear, but I know what I hate, so it's got to be Heavy Gear, because Shadowrun is just a train wreck. I don't find the fantasy cyberpunk thing particularly convincing or interesting, and the sort of the fascist Swedish elves that run Ireland in Shadowrun are probably reason enough on its own to vote it down. I think are we Tirnanog? I think we're Tirnanog.
Do you want?
Are we High Brazil or Tirnanog? Is it Tirnanog?
Tirnanog. I think it's
Tirnanog.
Yeah. Sorry, Conrad. You know what the sad thing is?
Yes.
That RPG was often held up by Irish gaming as the most accurate representation of Ireland in an RPG to that point.
I think it's
terrible.
I think it may be time to just put Shadowrun in the boot of the car, drive it to the quayside, put 2 bullets in it, and then go have a drink. Because this is Heavy Gear. No, voting for Heavy Gear.
So Savage, you are kingmaker. It seems.
No, that position I never really want to be in. I prefer the king. So back in the 90s when I wasn't running Werewolf, I was running Shadowrun. I think I based my campaign in Chicago, but I only had the second ed core book to go on. There wasn't a lot of role-playing books floating around in my neck of the woods back in the day. So I have a deep and abiding love of Shadowrun. I do love that sort of, as Eoin says, Ghost Rider of RPGs, he's absolutely right. It's just the idea of playing a troll with a minigun as your elf sort of hacker friend tries to get you off the top of this Renraku building.
Tirnanog, Savage. Tirnanog.
Damning Shadowrun for its villains.
Yeah, episode about this.
You might as well damn Robin Hood for for the Sheriff of Nottingham. Like, they're good villains. They're compelling villains.
We're all elves, Michael. Elves.
That's another matter, and I'm not going to get into the ELM sort of debate. But Heavy Gear, it's actually one of my favorite Gear settings, and it's to do with the Gear scale as well, because they're not the towering sort of colossuses of so the anime mechas. They're not the kind of the weird sort of amalgam of chicken legs that you find in MechWarrior. They're sort of relatable. They've got this kind of a cowboy and his horse aspect to them, because every gear is maybe 20 feet, the top out at about 20 feet,
12 to 20 feet.
Yeah, and they feel, when you look at them, they've got a very hard military sci-fi look to them. They're all bipedal. They're all basically sort of human proportions. But there's a great deal of, there's lots of time and effort poured into the difference between a Jaeger and a Black Mamba, things like that. So I really do like it. I like the setting as well. It's a very austere, empty sort of setting in a sense, because you've got the north and the south, and maybe some earthers in the middle. So there's a real kind of aspect to it that reminds me of the spaghetti western. I think there's good game to be played there along those lines. However, it ain't Shadowrun, and I love Shadowrun so much. So for me, it's Shadowrun.
Betrayal.
I like the way you set him up there. You give him some hope and then just cut the legs out from under him right at the end.
I'll remember this, Savage. Just you wait.
They didn't call me softy, they called me Savage. But and I say it with a heavy heart. I hate seeing these two up against each other, but I have to give it a shot.
Okay, all right, that's fine. We'll move on.
Oh, I don't think we will.
So next up, round 4 of this is a bit of a more modern set this time. First off, we have I want to say late 20-aughts game of transhumanism sci-fi, Eclipse Phase, where Earth has been, 5 apocalypses happened to it.
Once.
I'm pretty sure it got eaten by the Zerg and by the Terminators or something, and humanity is spread out all across the system. Most have thrown away their puny flesh bodies to turn into flying squids and things, it's an interesting but weird one, and it is up against the Gumshoe system of recent interviewees Palgwyn Press, the investigation RPG, which has been adapted to Cthulhu, Knights Black Agents, Secret 7, and many other investigation-based settings and concepts. So, what do people think of these newcomers to gaming?
Yeah, they've both been around for what?
Well,
10 years.
Eclipse Phase is... Okay, if you want the definition of cognitive dissonance, you can talk about me reading the Eclipse Phase rulebook. Because I sat down to read it, I was quite looking forward to it, and it's a lot of big ideas about transhumanism, and your body is just a shell, and you can change it and you can swap it out, and at the same time there's this very disturbed solar system where humans have kind of retreated to corners of it to stay away from the dreadful AIs and their tides of nanotech oozes and all this other crazy crap going on. And then I flipped and I went, okay, I'm kind of feeling this, let's flip to the example of play. And the example play is basically a team trying to break into a secure part of a satellite where they're under attack by all these AI androids who are just like these real skeletal things just marching at them, and they're just chopping them to pieces, but they're still coming, and they're opening up with their guns, and the octopus morph is trying to hack into the to open the door so they can get through to the next section, close the door, and stop these guys to go after them. I'm going, this is just D&D. Like, the robots are zombies, and the two fighters are holding them off while the rogue opens the lock of the door. You've got this big concept, you're just playing D&D in space. Like, what is even going on here? And I've never been able to shake that impression. Like, that just hit me like a hammer on the forehead. And since then, it's been like, yeah, that's my take on Eclipse Phase. You know, and I find it very difficult to get around that. It's just I just can't get away from it.
I think that feels a little harsh, because you're taking an impression from the game from an example in the rulebook, which is presumed to be an illustration of how certain mechanics work. Because you could say an example from any rulebook is just a dice rolling contest.
It was a bit of fiction. It wasn't like this character then rolls this. It was literally just a piece of fiction. It kind of setting up early in the book, and it was just that struck me, and I kind of put the book down, and I couldn't look at it again. It just hit me right in the face, and I was like, oh, that was my problem with my impression of it. I don't think it's reasonable. I think that's just what I got out of it.
Oh, no one here is. So, Mr.E, have you had any exposure to either of these?
I have played Eclipse Phase.
Right.
I have looked a little bit at Gumshoe, but won't claim to be super familiar with it. My impression of Gumshoe would be, the thing about Gumshoe is it's a system which has been applied to a whole bunch of different settings. Does it have its own inherent kind of background? I'm most familiar with it from its Cthulhu iteration.
Trail of Cthulhu was kind of the
job.
Yeah, it was kind of the baseline for it, and then since then they've used it as a generic system, and they also used it for Night's Black Agents.
Yeah,
and arguably you could pick it up and run a straight Sam Spade,
sure,
noir detective thing off
and
it, which is
so far as I can tell, it does that job reasonably well. That it actually has a pretty good mechanism for investigation, which is tricky to pull off.
It's great.
I will say though, I really liked Eclipse Phase, and to me, it is the best game around if you want to play an Altered Carbon RPG, because basically they lift everything out of the Takeshi Kovacs novels and go, well, here you go, we're going to put this into an RPG and change the labels, and it's spot on. And it is a game all about exploring transhumanism and exploring, concepts like, is this body who I am, and teleporting or emailing your brain to the other side of the galaxy so you can run around in a different body that has different abilities because that planet is low gravity or something. And it's chock full of very cool stuff like that. So if I'm casting a vote, I'll go Eclipse Phase. I think it picked its milieu, and I think it nailed it. I don't think any other RPG has done future cyber transhumanism as well as it has.
I'm going to jump in the middle.
Oh, and did you give anything to Gumshoe?
I didn't. What I would say about Gumshoe is Gumshoe has some revolutionary ideas about investigations in RPGs in terms of, guys, you shouldn't have to roll to find the evidence. Your problem should be too much evidence. Your problem should be like too much information. And there are a lot of really good ideas about how you do that. It's tied to what I think is a fairly lackluster combat system, which is kind of just there as an appendage, and it's got a brilliant anecdote or two. I would lean towards Gumshoe, but I'm not particularly pushed. But I would lean towards Gumshoe.
So I'm going to jump in the middle because I often hold fire. Eclipse Phase, much like Eoin, it's a game I have read rather than played. I had a very visceral reaction when I read it because I threw it across the room and went, hold on a second, that's just all of the ideas from Altered Carbon. So then I did go and read the foreword and noted that they they'd given props to Richard K. Morgan and the Tagashi Kovacs novels, so I was somewhat mollified. I read it though, and I did think to myself, man, this reads great. This is an amazing set of ideas, and it is bleeding edge in terms of updating what shows up in sci-fi RPGs to the kind of the current newest sort of fiction and newest sort of hot off the press, 3D printing, consciousness transfer, virtual realities, digital currencies, like all of it. It's all in there. They've done an amazing job of taking what we consider to be today's version of the future, today's vision of the future, and putting it into a game. I can see it as being a very GM-centric game. I think this feels like a system in a game where the GM has a lot of power, because almost anyone can show up from almost anywhere, back from the dead, copied, spliced, cloned, you name it. The players can be sucked out of their stacks at a moment's notice and dropped into morphs on a mining colony or an undersea arcology or anywhere else in the solar system. Like, there's lots and lots of potential to really go on a fantastic voyage. But mechanically, I'm not wild about what I saw there. It struck me as another one of these RPGs that you read rather than play. Gumshoe is, in a weird way, because we're looking at the Gumshoe system rather than any of the many excellent games.
Oh, no. If Shadowrun gets to let people pick whichever version they want, and 40k gets to pick whichever RPG people like the most, I think you can choose any of the different Gumshoe systems or settings. So you can pick Night's Black Agent or Trail of Cthulhu as your example.
Pretty
if you want.
incredible, and I mean, they've got sterling writers. I kind of have to go with Gumshoe here because it demonstrates it's got a flexibility, it's got an old school cool that I recognize. Like, it is a good framework to run a good, solid noir detective game off of. Even if you leave aside the versions that are about vampires and secret societies and all the rest. Eclipse Phase, I feel like it's going to be a science fiction role-playing game that a lot of people read and never play. But also, to give it props, it's going to be the one that everybody cites as the reason that they wrote a science fiction role-playing game. And I love the setting of Eclipse Phase. It is Babylon has fallen, Earth is lost to humanity, humanity is fractured along so many different lines. It's got every kind of crapsack, amazing, weird, sci-fi, local solar system future in it. And it goes a bit Stargate in its later iterations, if I recall correctly. So it's lots there to entice me, but I think Gumshoe does it for me because it's easier to grasp as a game, as something I can see myself playing. But then again, I've yet to be swept off my feet by a good table of Eclipse Phase players. I guess this could be one of the ones I'm corrected on. Let's shoot it over to Conrad.
Of the two, I think what I find particularly interesting is people's take on Gumshoe there, because Gumshoe was written for a specific game. It is not a generic system. It became a generic system. It was written for the esoterists by Robin D. Laws, to the best of my knowledge, and was then became a generic system when it was adapted for Trail of Cthulhu in the late 2000s, if memory serves. I think Eoin has a good point in that the combat system is very much an acquired taste, but I think the fundamentals are very sound. I think the fundamentals of the central idea of the game are that you will get the basic information that you need, and you may get extra information by spending the resources you have. It is incredibly flexible. I've used it to run Cthulhu. I've used it to run sort of Agatha Christie style games. I've used it to run Sam Spade style games. I've also used it to run a semi-investigative, sort of campaign war game via email set on a space Hulk, as a sort of a tactical Kriegspiel sort of thing. So it can do a lot of things, and I think that's quite impressive. It's done, any kind of investigative game. It's done sort of teenage Three Investigators, Secret Seven sort of stuff. It's done romance. It's done horror. It does.
I believe it's actually done D&D.
It's done.
I believe they are releasing the D&D Swords of the Serpentine.
Yeah,
is their new fantasy-inspired version.
Effectively, its central concept is a very robust set of mechanics that you can pick out and drop onto any game, which I will confess I've sort of done when running other RPGs. And it has a very strong set of conceptual tools for creating investigative games. So yes, I will, for two reasons. Firstly, I think Gumshoe is an incredibly well-written and incredibly robust series of games, both by its originator Robin D. Laws and its later interpreters, mostly Kenneth Hite. And Eclipse Phase is transhumanism, which I just think is icky and wrong. And I didn't particularly like Altered Carbon. So yeah, no, Gumshoe.
I think I want to change my vote.
Okay. Well, if you want.
I think I do want to change my vote. And not in response to anything Conrad has said, but although it was all very insightful.
The savage protests too much.
The problem, like Gumshoe, is actually quite well trodden at this point. It's what, 10 years old?
Over 10 years.
Over 10 years old. And Eclipse Phase hasn't had the same... hasn't
feel
had
like
the
there
same
was
sort of
a
offshoots.
Kickstarter for the second edition, perhaps? I don't remember. I feel like I heard noises about a second edition, but not very loud
My
noises.
impression is that Eclipse Phase is going to have an amazing 6th edition. You know?
The first Eclipse Phase is 2009.
Am I allowed to change my vote? Because this seems like... No, you know what? I think I have... No, we could be here all night if I do
no
that.
gods, no masters, Mick. You change your vote, you know?
Yeah, I've been sitting here sort of simmering ever since, and I have to say that Eclipse Phase just has such a unique sound compared to almost anything and everything else out there. And it's not to say that the world... And do you know what? That is not to say that the world does not need a very good, straight noir system and setting. But Gumshoe has probably been pressed more often into a sort of a horror investigation mold than not, which, of course, given its origins, makes sense. Okay, I'm flipping. I can't. And this is the only time I'll do this tonight. I promise. I'm flipping from Gumshoe to Eclipse Phase. I can't believe I'm doing.
So this is the only time you'll be inconsistent. Noted.
So I think that leaves me. This is a tougher one for me. I keep looking at these two and I keep thinking about this in these terms. I would not want to play an Eclipse Phase game, but I'd be very happy to run one. I would not like to run a Gumshoe game, but I would be very happy to play in a Gumshoe game. And that's a very personal place. It's like something like Eclipse Phase with all of its weirdness and different subsettings and different mechanics and stuff. I feel like I would need to have the reins. I would not like to expose myself to someone others' take on the material. And
because it is icky and weird.
That's an interesting take.
Kind
of
because it's weird, and just because I'm gonna be honest, Savage, and you might hate me, I didn't really like Altered Carbon all that much.
It's not everyone's cup of tea.
It's a mine of ideas, but I feel like I would need to have someone trustworthy in the range, and it would probably have to be myself. Whereas I wouldn't even know where to begin starting up a Gumshoe game to run, but I'd be really into to try expanding my play experience and try something investigation, trying being, smart detective guy, thinking about my evidence. I would really like to jump into that. So I'm kind of split here. Actually, can we just quickly check? Do I have to vote?
Yes. We're not rolling the dice. We got 5 here. This is the one advantage of having 5.
And it's your civic duty. No,
Yeah.
wait, that's something else.
This is.
Have I perhaps landed
I'm
you in
sorry,
a tough
okay.
spot?
Star, why is it every time you have to make a decision about one of these, it's like asking my wife where she wants to go eat?
I think I'm going to go with our recent guest,
Pat Tobin?
Kat Tobin. Sorry, some editor, please cut out that embarrassing
I'll
pause.
consider it.
Lengthen it, Nick. Lengthen the pause.
Throw in something like, oh yeah, that chick. What was her name again?
Tallulah, wasn't it?
We're cutting all of this. You've just ensured that.
Yes, I would like to vote for Gumshoe just because I trust the writers and the team behind Gumshoe more than I would trust the Eclipse Phase writers, and that might sound conspiratorial, but in this RPG industry, I just feel like you gotta know where your friends are.
Well, that perfectly encapsulates this entire bracket. Right, that one goes to Gumshoe by a hair and a flip-flop on this occasion. So that's
All right, ever onwards. We've got to keep going. We've got to speed it up, guys.
Well,
Yeah.
I just want to point out we're 4 of these matchups in, and
We're nearly at an hour.
Don't look at that. Okay, so lightning round.
Yeah,
Lightning round.
absolutely.
lightning round. Okay, lightning round. D&D 5th Ed versus Burning Wheel.
Oh my god. Okay, I hate D&D 5th Ed more than any other RPG in the world. A lower effort version of D&D does not exist. Every other version of D&D or every other RPG is made with mad passion by lunatics. This was cranked out to fulfill contractual obligations. And of course it's the most successful. Irony demands nothing else. God, I hate it. Burning Wheel is a RPG crafted by a lunatic who talks like a wizard in his Kickstarter. I'm still voting for Burning Wheel.
Conrad.
Well, I'll go for D&D 5th Ed because it's dragged a whole bunch of new people into the hobby, and it's the only one I've ever had a conversation about with one of the girls at work who needed to be have her hand held when she discovered that she was going to be she was going to be DMing her first game that night. The group she was playing with dropped it on her. And we managed to cobble together a game in 25 minutes. And if that isn't worth having, I don't know what is.
Ooh, okay. Scar.
I bought a mail order. Burning Wheel was one of the first games I mail ordered specifically to get a copy of. Back when I was in Limerick, I poured over those 2 tomes with their extra little wrappy binder around them. And then at some point in my move from Limerick, I lost that book. And every couple of weeks, I just find some reason, I look online, see people talking about Burning Wheel, and I say, I need to get that book again so I can tell what the hell these people are talking about. Burning Wheel was more confusing to me than like Exalted, any story game. I could not get my head round the madness that was Burning Wheel. If you like Mouse Guard, that's all very well. I don't know how you got a playable game out of Burning Wheel, but if you found that you can play a game of Mouse Guard and yeah, this is okay, that's fine. But D&D, for all of its many well-documented faults, is playable. And therefore I will vote for D&D 5th Ed.
Alright, Mr.E.
Burning Wheel is bonkers. Let's face it. It's a whole patchwork of crazy stuff rolled into one. It's got some just outright stupid stuff in it. I mean, just glancing at some stuff right now, elves have the grief statistic. It's a stat on their character sheet. Oh, God. I just couldn't be having with it. D&D 5th Ed is as Owen says, it's a bit lazy. It's dialed in. Or phoned in. It's not trying to break any new ground. It is definitely reined in and to an extent dumbed down, but that's not always a bad thing. I actually like D&D 5th Ed's simplification. You can just go ahead and jump in and play the game without having to wade through quite as much nonsense as you would with previous editions of D&D, and I think they've done some very clever mathematical modeling in implementing their bounded accuracy system. Whether it actually works or not, I don't care so much, but it does mean that they sat down and at least tried to run some numbers, which is amazingly a step that so many RPG writers just don't even consider. So I think they should get some credit just for giving it a go. So I'll go D&D 5th Ed. It is a little bit dull as a game, but Burning Wheel is just this unplayable basket of nonsense.
Burning Wheel, a bit like Raygun magazine back in the day, inspiration for an awful lot of other people to go out and write an OSR game, because Burning Wheel was definitely OSR before it was a thing, old school Renaissance D&D. It was long before.
It was in the proto. It was from the same cauldron.
Yeah, well,
same cauldron
as Obelisk.
Believe.
Who fell in as a baby and drank a bunch of magic potion. And I think the writers of Burning Wheel did the same. I think 5th Ed is going to be remembered fondly as the thing that they strapped onto 4th Ed and got a decent edition of D&D out of. So I'm not actually wild about either, but in terms of usability, I have to give it to 5th Ed. Burning Wheel is a very imaginative set of rules, which is not something you can often say about a set of rules. It is, however, a little too esoteric for my blood. And as a GM, I need something that I don't have to struggle to explain to the group. So I'm going to very quickly drop the ball into the D&D bucket on this one. Although, I'd prefer to see Burning Wheel go up against a different edition of D&D.
Yeah. Well, Sean can breathe easily for this round at least, and that his darling has survived the first wave. Okay, lightning round number 2. Next up is any edition of the weird 90s RPG Torg, which I know it has at least 2, versus, and this is where the unspecificity is going to possibly be a bit of a unfair bit, but whichever Star Trek RPG people have the greatest fondness for, because I didn't really want to go through the massive list of different Star Trek RPGs, try to find out one in particular.
I'm going to jump in first here because I never do. I don't know anything about these. Torg has some of the weirdest edition cover art. Like, just go and look at it. It's like a Ukrainian folk album. It's just so odd. And Star Trek is bland as porridge with no raisins, no honey, no sugar, no chocolate. I give it to Torg just on cover alone, because I know exactly what every single Star Trek RPG cover looks like without having seen it. If there's ever a third edition of Torg, I have no idea what to put in the cover. I suspect one of them will be Ukrainian though. So I'm giving it to Torg on the basis of nothing more than the cover art.
Fair.
Next.
The Ukrainian expansion of Torg is currently coming out, actually. It's just finished up on Kickstarter.
I don't know if you're lying or not.
I'm not really. It's the one set in Thargold, which is Russia. The bit of the demon world that invaded Russia. It's actually a part of it's in the Ukraine, as I recall. Torg is a crazy RPG because it was effectively, we did Star Wars, now we're doing the other RPG. We don't have a name for it yet. Just put it down as Torg and we'll fill in the name later. 6 months later, I guess we're calling it Torg. Torg it's up there with Rifts as being the craziest kitchen sink RPG where everything's just tossed in there. And yeah, you want to be a Frankenstein's monster fighting with a guy in a mech suit? Yeah, sure, let's do that. That sounds fun. It's lunatic, it's berserk. It had the chutzpah to put in a logarithmic scale on its D20 results, I've a lot. It plays cards. There's a mini game around, basically playing action cards down and doing stuff. And you roll over 60 glory. It's really funky, very cool. A lot of very tactile game when you're playing it at the table, because you're messing around with cards, you're passing along chips, you're doing stuff with it. I've really a lot of fondness for it. The best Star Trek RPG is the 2D20 one that just came out from Ophidius, which feels incredibly like actually Star Trek. But I'm going to go with Torg, because Torg's berserk.
Okay, get your hot takes, folks. Jump in.
Well, I'll follow up on there, and I think I'll probably lean in the same way. I'm not super familiar with each, but Torg is kind of, it's exploratory. It's trying new-ish and certainly interesting stuff. It's it's ninja empires in the near future and all sorts of weirdness. Star Trek is such a hard one, I think, as even a setting for an RPG, because all of the stuff that distinguishes the Star Trek TV series, the good stuff about the Star Trek TV series in their various incarnations, from the most generic and dull sci-fi you can consider, is down to scripting and discussion of topics and exploration of things. And while you can do some of that in an RPG, you can't do it in the same way. You can't, and without railroading your players to the nth degree, they're going to mess up the carefully crafted exploration of whether the android is a person or not. I don't think the Star Trek universe is terribly well suited to anything other than a kind of a Monster of the Week style RPG where you fly from planet to planet and beat up a guy in a different colored rubber suit. So I'm going to go with Torg because they do weird, crazy, interesting things and just about get away with it.
Okay. Well, now that doesn't matter. I'm happy to be the dissenter. I have to get my own back at Savage somehow, so I'm going to steal his dissenter title. Torg's just a little bit too crazy for my blood. Like, it's got that whole Rifts vibe of just all the stuff going there, but it's also got a bunch of weird noodliness, like if you go to the Stone Age world, your mech suit stops working, and it just... Huh?
It doesn't stop working, it just has a chance to stop them working.
I don't know. I just don't think that Torg and me are in the same vibe of crazy. I could see something like Torg working for me, but just what I've read of Torg is just a little bit off. And Star Trek, I know Star Trek. I can do something with Star Trek. As long as I have a good system, and I have probably half a dozen to choose from at this stage, everything from the terrible D&D clone of the Starfleet RPG back in the 80s to 2D20 today. I can channel my 90s television watching. I can channel all that Deep Space Nine that I watched and loved. All that Next Generation. I can fix Voyager by doing it right with a competent writer, i.e. me. Yes, I feel no hubris in saying that I could probably write a better show than the Star Trek Voyager writers. I said it. But yes, I dissent and I say Star Trek for me. Conrad.
Torg is a wild, woolly system. It has a lot of fun stuff. The cards are great. The fact that it manages to integrate all those different settings is great. It does, however, have the Nile Empire, which I absolutely adore. And has I'm ashamed to say I cannot remember who wrote this, but it also has one of the best pieces of short gaming fiction that I've ever read called The Chekhov Strain, and it's just ace, where a Fu Manchu type character from that particular reality is trying to destroy his enemies by making them boring, and basically has a bunch of, I believe, actors performing the works of Anton Chekhov to distill down Russian realist drama into some kind of weapon. And if you're not on board with that, frankly, we can't be friends. And Star Trek has just gotten worse ever since in every iteration after the original series. So yeah, it's got to be Torg.
Okay, I dissent, and but I know when I'm beaten. So let's move on.
That's not why you dissent. You never dissent because you know you're beaten, or never admit to being beaten. There's always another revolution.
Yeah, Conrad gave you an opening there to start a whole actual war, and you just let it go. But
that's
we're an hour into this episode. We need to keep going.
I think we can take the foot off the pedal slightly. We made it to round 7, and it's been rough, but here we are. We're still all.
Round 7, you say? Round 7, you say? Well,
we're on this call.
The star
of
round
friends.
7 will be 7th Sea, the fantasy pirate RPG, and it of some repute, with alternate names for all the European countries and a whole lot of buckles to swash. And it is up against the Cortex and Cortex Plus systems, which I am looking up now because I've forgotten them because there's so many of the Cortex is the one.
Is it Weiss and Hickman, or is that no? That's
I believe it is Margaret Wise Productions, and I believe Mr. Hickman is part of it. So the Cortex system is responsible for the Serenity, Battlestar Galactica, and Supernatural RPGs. And the Cortex Plus is similarly used for Smallville, Leverage, Firefly, because there needs to be a separate Serenity and Firefly RPG because licensing's weird, and also a apparently well received version of the Marvel RPG. So, can this gang of systems face off against 7th Sea?
So 7th Sea is interesting in that it's got two very different editions in terms of mechanics, and they're both terrible in their own way. 7th Sea uses first edition uses a version of L5R's Roland Keep system from the first edition. The problem with it was that they basically went, okay, if you want to be instead of Shigenja and Bushi, they had swordsmen and sorcerers. And if you wanted to play a swordsman, you have to buy all these really expensive skills to do with being a swordsman. And it's like, you've got to do beat blade, and there's this really complicated fighting system where you can't, okay, he's using this defense, I counter with this attack, and stuff. And then sorcerers play a huge amount of points for really minor powers. And it turned out that the best way to actually play the game was to build a generic character instead by accident, because that generic character gets really, really high power stat panache, which is what your actual fight with. So it turns out that building a jack of all trades was way better than building one of the specialized fighting or magic characters. So just a weird oddity. The second edition one was an amazing idea that is really a bit too deterministic in play. You basically roll your dice, you generate a bunch of successes, and then you just spend them to do stuff in the scene. And when you accomplish the scene, the scene's over. But it was a first draft idea that got rushed out for Gen Con. So difficult from that point of view. I really love the setting, but the system makes it hard to love. Cortex was a decent setting. The most interesting iteration of it was the linked but not identical Marvel one, which was an excellent system that got canned when Marvel got sold to Disney. And it got sold super fast. So I'm going to go for Cortex in this case, despite the fact I love 7C setting.
Annoyingly, I find myself once again largely in agreement with Eoin. I think the 7C setting, I'm not a personal fan of it, but I acknowledge it's a solid setting. It's pretty good. I just didn't like that particular kind of iteration of the Age of Sail setting. I would prefer to see it without magic for a start. But mechanically, the games were shoddily put together. Cortex. I found a copy of Serenity, dirt cheap, £3 or something like that at a used bookshop somewhere. I don't remember where. I picked it up, I gave it a read, and I thought it was full of really clever little ideas, very small ideas, iterations and kind of tweaks on ideas that you'll have seen in other places. There's a good bit of Savage Worlds in there where as your skills increase, your die type changes. But they did they tweaked it so that once you reach a certain die type, you've got to specialize once you reach a D8, to get to the next die size up, you've got to specialize. They use the thing where you pair a stat and a skill to, roll those dice. I loved their take on the hit track, the wound track, where you take damage from two directions at once. So you take actual sort of wound damage and then stun or shock damage from the other direction, and when they meet, you fall down. You only actually die if your lethal wounds reaches the other end of the track. I liked it so much that I didn't run Serenity, but I used the system because I thought it was lightweight and flexible. I used it to run other games. So I'm a big fan of Cortex. I think it's a nicely put together system that is adaptable, does its job quickly and easily. So I'm definitely going to pick Cortex in this one because 7th Sea's mechanics just aren't good enough.
I'm going to
So it's
say for myself, I don't like pirates as much as everyone else in the universe does. I feel like personally that I need something extra on a Age of Sail-ish game to make it pop, and Seventh Seas light fantasy elements and weird air of smug isn't what does it for me. I'm going to say
that'd be the John Wick influence. That'd be
yeah.
the John Wick influence. Not that one, folks. The one before Keanu. Even his Wikipedia picture looks smug.
Yeah.
That's John. I don't need a microphone. I'm John Wick. Wick.
Yeah, but I don't know. I've just never glommed on to 7th Sea like so many have. It just hasn't bit into me. Whereas I've checked out the Cortex systems, I've been around the periphery of them, and they just seem to have something going on. They have a wide variety of settings. If I wanted to indulge my early 2000s TV tastes, but also it just seems to have a solid base. Both versions just seem to have a solid base. Original Cortex for some grittier stuff, and Cortex Plus for rules light superhero stuff. There's just enough there that I think, yeah, I'd give this a try. I feel like Cortex wins this for me, but easily.
7th Sea, I love the Age of Sail. I'm fascinated by it, and I think that it's a setting that's sort of crying out for a role playing game, and that role playing game is Flashing Blades. I'm just profoundly irritated by the faux Europe of 7th Sea, in that, there's plenty of real Europe there. Why couldn't you use that, John? If you wanted to add, it's not like the 17th century lacked for interesting occult nonsense. So yeah, I've played one or two Cortex games. They are pleasant and innocuous, and I will select Cortex on the grounds that I intensely dislike 7th Sea.
Well, I mean, in defense of Alderac, who originated 7th Sea, didn't they? They were doing to Europe what they'd already done to feudal Japan in the form of Legend of the Five Rings, and everyone seems to love that, at least in this side of the world. So I actually quite like the kind of the slightly weird takes on the Age of Sail powers that that 7th presents, and then it's got magic, which I actually could kind of do without in this sort of setting. I prefer a straight swashbuckler, so yeah, flashing blades would probably land a bit better for me. This one is going to come down to personalities for me. I mean, you've got John Wick on one side and Joss Whedon on the other, because for whatever reason, an inordinate number of the licensed properties that the Cortex system has wound up in are Joss Whedon vehicles. You've got Fireflies around the
no, the
Buffy
RPG predates this quite a bit.
But it's similar enough systems, as far as I recall. I think it was kind of the precursor to
Battlestar and Supernatural are the outliers. Like Mr.E says, I kind of have a soft spot for those kind of damage versus fatigue versus whatever else tracking systems, especially when they're kind of merging rather than being tracked separately or whatever. So you can play these balancing acts. It's a smarter kind of, it's a cool little idea. I think could probably do with being in a few more combat heavy systems, and most of the Cortex stuff is combat heavy. Like you're going to get into tussles every single time you sit down at the table. Yeah, I'm going to cut this one short and say I'm going to let Cortex edge it out ever so slightly over 7C, despite the personalities who are attached, because as we all know, most white male creators are cancelled at this point.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give it to Cortex.
Well, I think that's actually a clean sweep for Cortex.
So, is it? Oh, okay. Well, there you go. That
last
brings
matchup.
us to our final tusslers,
Okay.
final
This one might.
combatants tonight.
This one, I
Who
don't
have we
think it's
got?
going to be the most controversial, but it's going to probably give us a couple of enemies, and I wouldn't. I would check. No one knows where you sleep.
Oh, because I need another one of those.
This is not FFG.
Like in Minecraft, I'm now moving my bed, folks. So
This is
you'll
the
never
prize of
find me.
publishing sci-fi fantasy RPG Starfinder versus the venerable satirical RPG of great infamy, Paranoia.
Can I just take a moment, apropos to nothing? Why is it every single sci-fi RPG that comes out in the last 20 odd years has just an entirely interchangeable name? Like, I couldn't pick a Pathfinder from a Ashen Stars, from a Fading Suns. They're just like, pick a better name. Eclipse Phase might just age it as being memorable, but only in a Quantum of Solace sort of way.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump straight in there, and I'm going to pick up on that and go, Starfinder's terrible. Because basically it's Pathfinder in space. It has all the exact same flaws that D20 Modern had, or trying to run any sci-fi game has when you build it using a system that was designed for dungeon crawly fantasy. It's just like, if you're going to completely change your setting, you need a different system. And that's, they adapted it and adjusted stuff, but fundamentally they didn't change it anywhere near enough. It's a D20 system. It's got, those systems are grand for dungeon crawling fantasy, in my opinion. They don't suit games where people are whacking one another in the head with plasma blasters. Paranoia has ups and downs.
Laser swords.
Paranoia, I think it does some things very, very clever. The additions change the tone dramatically. And I don't like it when people go the whole kind of complete play it for laughs. The guys who are standing on the tables at the convention hailing computer at the top of their lungs. But the earlier stuff where it is very kind of dark and satirical and has that sort of nasty twist to it worked really, really well. So I think Starfinder is just getting obliterated here. It's just not.
Getting the space.
Starfinder is fundamentally flawed. Paranoia has ups and downs, but the concept, particularly in the earlier, darker versions, was really, really good.
I'll jump in second then. Paranoia demands a great deal of a table of players and whoever's running the game. Like, first of all, you have this tightrope of tone. Like, what is it you're actually trying to achieve as a group? Is this kind of a weird sort of Monty Python meets Fallout? And is Pathfinder the Fallout of RPGs, in that every single different iteration of it has this kind of shift in tone that takes it in different directions? To draw that analogy out further, like, look at the various iterations of Fallout down the years and how it's fundamentally changed. And Paranoia has 6th edition now, and as Mr.E was saying, like, there's been significant shifts, all inside that envelope of a kind of crazy dystopian future where you're sort of a bit like a stainless steel rat caught in a maze. Starfinder, another. We don't have place at the table for another system about waving around your laser sword while standing in the spaceship dungeon. Paranoia, as I said, demands an awful lot of its players, but I feel like if you hit that sweet spot and everybody's kind of got the right outlook and everyone's got the right rhythm, then you are in for a hell of a time. There's nothing like it, and there are far too many things like Starfinder. So I'll go with Paranoia.
I'm gonna be a dissenter at this point.
You can just have your own opinion.
Well, I think I largely agree with Mick, but like, I feel like the sweet spot's harder to reach. The sweet spot for Paranoia is harder to reach than he's letting on. So I feel like you need like a great GM and a table that's on the exact same wavelength as that GM. I would be very hesitant to go into any a one shot of Paranoia. That sounds like it might be a bit of a lark if I have nothing else to do but it could just as easily end up with 3 people shouting in the corner while I check my phone, as it could be a lovely round table poking at our modern society. I don't feel Paranoia is reliable enough for me to vote on it as a system. I could maybe vote on that one Paranoia game I ran sometime, if I had run it one time, and I use that as my example, as my measuring stick, but I just don't think it's. I feel like the stars would have to align, and send a beam of cosmic energy to my gaming table for me to get a really good, solid Paranoia campaign. Whereas Starfinder, it's chocolate. It's just basic chocolate, not dairy milk or anything amazing, but it's like you can stuff a bar in your face. It's disposable. It's.
I am annoyed now because I had also come up with a food metaphor for this particular this particular matchup. Paranoia is demanding an acquired taste, complex, and frequently goes wrong. Starfinder is like American cheese, and for that reason, it has to be Paranoia. And also because it's had some excellent writing. Greg Kostikian's done some absolutely savage stuff. The Trader's Manual, which was done in the early 2000s, I think, by Gar Hanrahan, is just even as a book to read, it's fantastic. I've had some tremendous times both running and playing Paranoia, and Starfinder. I think you could probably have a very good time playing Starfinder, but I just wouldn't tell anyone about it.
Scar, did we sort of?
It's just chocolate.
Do you like chocolate?
No,
Cheese and chocolate.
we like chocolate. That's the problem. It's not chocolate. It's It's gruel.
It's Hershey's chocolate.
It's porridge. Oh god, it is.
My point, it's Hershey's chocolate. It's American cheese. It has nutritional value, but that is about the height of it.
Scar, where are you landing on this? Hold on, I didn't get a clear sense of where Scar wanted to be on this one.
I'm taking 10 on Starfinder as opposed to aiming for 20
I see.
on Paranoia.
No, that's fair.
Is my
Okay, so over to you, Owen.
Paranoia, I think, has the greatest variation in table play of any RPG. I think it is one of the few RPGs that if someone said to me sight unseen, hey, do you want to come Paranoia with us? I'd be like, I really don't know you guys well enough to agree to that. I think you'd have a tremendous amount of variation about what it's about, how it's played, and I think what some people will find utterly insufferable is other people's Nirvana. So I think it's the most Reese's Pieces of RPGs, depending on how it's played. Because it'd be like, oh god, this is not what I want, or this is exactly what I want. Very, very entertaining RPG, very, very classically dark humor. Starfinder is the Dick Turpin of Paizo RPGs. And by Dick Turpin, I'm making a reference to Good Omens, where the character Newton Pulsifer drives a Japanese wasabi car, which was basically built on the day between the Japanese go from copying Western designs to fiendishly innovating, and it's that confused model born on that day. Pathfinder 1st edition was a mess of options and mad craziness, and Pathfinder 2nd edition is an incredibly refined beast. Starfinder occupies the Star Wars Saga edition slot, where it was between two major editions, and it's got some halfway shifts that are just... I was really excited for Starfinder. I got it and I was the most disappointed I've ever been in an RPG. It was terrible. Or at least it was terribly disappointing.
Wow, that knowing the breadth of RPGs you have at your disposal, Owen, that is damning.
It was the most disappointing. It was because it was like, I was really keyed up for it. I was going, awesome, this is going to be great. There's a ton of cool ideas.
Wasn't it? Like, it got a lot of hype.
It did, and it was a ton of cool ideas. It was like stuff like the Solarian, who was going to be, you're the stellar powered hero. You can be powered by the sun, and basically you're all about, that, or you can be powered by gravity, and you've all these tricks for pulling people around, and it turns out they just work terribly. It's really boring. You just full attack because nothing else is worth doing, and it was very disappointing from that point of view. So I'm going Paranoia on this one, because Starfinder is this. But Starfinder did give birth to Pathfinder 2, because they figured out we didn't go far enough, we got to go further with Pathfinder 2, and they had a great RPG come out of that, so it was a valuable learning experience, but man oh man, whew, disappointing.
Okay.
Wow. Wait, when did I become Mr. Contrary? I thought that was next to you.
Owen, where are you landing?
Paranoia.
Right, I think Paranoia's...
Yeah, that's a 4-1. That's a 4-1. Yeah.
I suppose we'll have to save the aftermatch analysis for the Discord. Owen, do you want to take us out after this slogfest? We're not getting any better at this.
No, yeah. Look, it turns...
Just recap the results
there.
there.
Going up to 5 people was not the secret ingredient making this go faster.
Okay, so very quickly, I'm just going to go through the this last 8 matchups. We had 13th Age and Dark, and the entire 40k FFG Black Library oeuvre of RPGs, including Dark Heresy, Death Watch, Rogue Trader, etc., Only War, and the Chaos one, which won out against poor old 13th Age on its own. In the second round, we had Genesis versus Earthdawn. Earthdawn took it. The third round was Shadowrun versus Heavy Gear, and Shadowrun, for all its faults, took it home. After a monstrous flip-flop by yours truly, Gumshoe came out on top against just about.
Despite the fact that you started in the back,
which is perhaps too nebulous a beast to be described in dice and pen. Fifth round, we saw D&D 5th Ed go up against Burning Wheel. D&D 5th Ed advances. The Burning Wheel rolls on. Sixth round, Torg versus Star Trek. Torg, I think, did it sweep? I think it swept. No, you dissented. We had dissenting all round. And seventh round saw 7th Age go up against the Cortex system, which took it on personality. And lastly, you've just heard us deliberate on Starfinder versus Paranoia. And Paranoia, that Terry Gilliam-esque RPG takes the last slot for this edition of the bracket fight. Owen, would you like to close the door on the arena? Sweep the
Absolutely. We're 3/4 of the way there after probably coming up in 4 hours. We've got one final quarter left to do, and then we're into the serious grudge matches. And don't worry, Fifth Ed, I'm gonna get you yet. This party's over.
Thank you for listening to The Adventuring Party. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can head on over to SpeakPipe and drop us a line. Or you can join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or Twitter. Or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license. But you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.